Okay, so in this video we're still talking about solving quadratic equations by hand. We're using a new method which is going to really help those people that really struggle with completing the square and struggle with factoring, because all it is a formula. If you can get this formula memorized, but you've probably seen it before, it's called the quadratic formula and it's got a little song to it. I'll suggest you YouTube the song. It's just called Quadratic Formula Song. Goes to Pop, goes to Weasel. I'm not going to sing it for you. I'm not going to put you through that torture. But anyways, if you know the formula and you know how to use it, you can solve any quadratic equation. The only thing you got to worry about is make sure when you're solving a quadratic equation is you get everything on one side and you have equal 0. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So the quadratic equation here, A, B, and C are just numbers. Can be positive, negative, 0, as long as A cannot be 0. Anything else can be 0. So positive, negative, decimal fraction. As long as A is not 0, everything's fair game. Okay, so what we're going to do is just do the first problem using the quadratic formula. The very first thing I need to do again, since I'm solving a quadratic, I don't care what method you're doing, is to get everything on the same side. And again, let me just emphasize, almost anything can be solved using the calculator. Like we saw in the previous video, sometimes the calculator fails. So about 95% of the time, the calculator is going to be okay. So just keep that in mind. If you want to try to using the calculator, you might have to come back and do it by hand. Alright, so to get everything on the same side, I want everything on the left, so I'm going to say plus 9, plus 9. Combine like terms. So I have x squared minus x plus 9 equals 5x. I still want to get everything on the left-hand side, so I'm going to say minus 5x, and I'm going to combine like terms. So I end up with x squared minus 6x plus 9 equals 0. Okay, so now that I've got everything on the same side and I have my equal 0, what I need to now do is to pay attention to this pattern. Ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. What I need to do is figure out what's my a, what's my b, what's my c. Well, there's nothing in front of my x squared, so that means there's an understood 1 there. Anytime there's nothing in front of a variable, there's always an understood 1. So that means a equals 1, b equals negative 6, and c equals 9. So now what I'm going to do is start plugging into my quadratic equation. So x equals negative of negative 6 plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, everything divided by 2 times a. Now I want to clean this up as much as I can. What I suggest is you start working on the inside of the square root first. Do not try to type all of this in at one time. So all I'm going to focus on is negative 6 squared minus 4 times 1 times 9. I'm going to use my calculator just because that's going to be a little bit more efficient. So back on my main screen, clear out any other stuff you might have there. So negative 6 squared minus 4 times 1 times 9. Type it in exactly the way it looks. Remember, every time you plug in a number, which we're plugging in for A, B, and C into that quadratic formula, you need to put it in parentheses. If not, your calculator could give you a wrong answer. So I get 0. So my formula now becomes negative negative of negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 0 divided by 2 times 1. Go ahead and clean that up. That's 2. Well, we know the square root of 0 is 0. So we have negative of negative 6 plus 0. Really, we don't need plus or minus 0 because that doesn't do anything for us. So we just have on top x equals negative of negative 6. Well, we all should know that negative and negative is a positive. So really on top we just have plus 6, or positive 6. And 6 divided by 2 is 3. So x equals 3. That's the problem. That means for this quadratic, in the very first example that we did, only has one solution. So if you graph this, there's only going to be one point of intersection. Okay? What I suggest you do is go back and kind of pause it, maybe rewind and rewatch this, or make sure you get it down, make sure you understand quadratic formula. You might also want to go back and graph the original problem, just the way it's written, y1 on the left, y2 on the right, and verify that x equals 3 is the answer. What I'm going to do is get rid of my scratch work, and I'm going to do the second problem in green. So when you come back, hit play, we'll be able to pick up where we left off. I'm going to get rid of this scratch work though, okay? So. Alright, so the second problem I'm going to do in green. And the very first thing I want to do is get everything on the same side. So I'm going to say minus 2, minus 2. Combine like terms. So minus x squared plus 2x minus 2 equals 0. Now I want to fit that into this pattern. Ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. That's your very first objective, is to figure out what's a, what's b, what's c. So based on this, we know there's an understood 1 in front of my x squared. So a is negative 1, b is positive 2, and c is negative 2. I want to plug in now to my quadratic formula. Remember, every time you plug in a number for a, b, or c, you need to put it in parentheses. Otherwise, it's very likely that it's going to come out wrong. So I have x equals negative of positive 2 plus or minus square root of positive 2 squared minus 4 times negative 1 times negative 2. And then everything divided by 2 times negative 1. What I want to start doing now is cleaning this up as much as I can. So again, I like to start working on the inside of the square root first, and that's all I'm going to focus on right now. So using my calculator, I want to clean out the scratch work that I did on the previous problem. So I have 2 squared minus 4 parentheses negative 1 parentheses negative 2. And I get negative 4. So what that means is my quadratic formula now becomes negative 2 plus or minus the square root of negative 4 divided by 2 times negative 1 is negative 2. Okay, well, like we saw in the previous video, anytime we have the square root of a negative, that means automatically we're going to have a complex solution. That means we're going to see our I. So that this guy right here can be rewritten as, just going to do this in a couple steps. Also, we can go ahead and take care of this. Negative and a positive is a negative, so this is just negative 2. So x equals negative 2 plus or minus the square root of negative 1 times 4 divided by negative 2. And again, like we saw in chapter 2, we can split this square root up into 2 separate square roots. So x equals negative 2 plus or minus square root of negative 1 times square root of 4 divided by negative 2. Now, a couple things are going on here now that we did this scratch work. First off, the square root of 4 is 2. And anytime we take the square root of negative 1, that's an I. So we actually have x equals negative 2 plus or minus 2i divided by negative 2. We now have x by itself. We have 2 answers, but since we see the I, that means graphically they're not going to show up. It's going to look like no real solution if we graph it. But remember, anytime we see no real solution graphing, that means we have to do the algebra to get the complex solution. So this has 2 complex solutions. We can either write it this way, since x is by itself, or split it up into 2 separate answers. So my first answer is negative 2 plus 2i divided by negative 2. And my second answer is negative 2 minus 2i divided by negative 2. Now, you could leave it like that, totally fine. You split it up. But what I'm going to do now is divide everything by that negative 2. First off, negative 2 divided by negative 2 is positive 1. So 1 plus, and then positive 2 divided by negative 1 is actually minus 1. So minus 1i is my first answer, 1 minus 1i. Same thing, negative negative makes a positive, so I have 1. Negative negative is a positive, and 2 divided by 2 is 1, so plus 1i. So again, you can leave your answer like this, or you can split it up and leave it like this, or you can simplify it all the way down and get your best perfect answer like this. Again, you see the I, that means graphically it's not going to show up as any solutions at all. So you might get, hey, there's no answer, but actually there is. There's 2 complex answers. So again, graphing only works about 95% of the time. If you see no real solution, that means there's no points of intersection on the graph. That means you have to either use quadratic formula that we did in this video, or completing the square that we did in the previous video to find your complex solutions. Might seem a little complicated, but it's going to take practice. If you practice and you actually do your best, I'm sure you'll get it. Let me know if I can help you.